Good morning and welcome to the Advances in Research and Innovation stream of SNOMED Expo 2023. My name is Terence Sherd and I'm the Tooling Operations Manager at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's session. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation, and online attendees, please make use of the Q&A session that is available in the bottom of your toolbars. And in the room, we'll be using a mic at the back of the room. I'm now pleased to introduce G Reynoso from TermMed, who will be presenting exploring alternatives to enhance the representation of context in clinical observations and statements. Guillermo, please go ahead.
Thank you. We had a presentation prepared that was quite opinionated and based on our research, with some broad alternatives about how to deal with context in SNOMED and how to change things. Or try to improve the way SNOMED could be used while recording health data. However, earlier this week, we had a meeting with most of the interested parties, and there is consensus now that SNOMED International will be leading a project where this will be considered and be broadly discussed in the community, and there will be implementation advice about this. So I have retired most of my comments about how we can do it, because there will be a process for doing that will be coming from SNOMED International in the next 2 years. So I'm here mostly to give you some context about context, and then focus only on one of the points, that is, it is most of the, apart from context, we have context that is, for example, present or absent. And so far, those things that have situations that have non-absent, or those has interpretation that have a negative, are producing incorrect inferences. So to improve those inferences, we have to invert the hierarchies. And to invert the hierarchies, our point is, it is not so difficult. It is possible to do it. And eventually there will be a need to perhaps to change part of the processing in the classifier, but it is doable. Yes, you can try it with different options. The most easy option is to classify 2 times, yes, and introduce changes in the ontology in the middle and classify it again. Obviously, there are several ways of doing it, different approaches. And then after you get what you want, you can try to optimize that. Clearly, this is one of the points where instead of classifying 2 times, you will do incremental classification. Yes, you will be classifying once, you will be making adjustments, and then let incremental classification get you the results. And so at the end of the day, it should be more or less the same classification time. Okay, so this is the context of the context, why we are here and why this presentation, instead of getting into the wild, will try to be a gentle introduction about the topic. Okay, I'm just bringing here parts of the documentation you will find in the editorial guidance. Here you see that there are different ways of representing context in SNOMED, and there are several ways of managing that. And the most obvious one is to say, well, part of the presentation will be ideally in the information model. And SNOMED, I mean, one of the solutions will be all the context is managed in the information model, and SNOMED only has 3 context concepts. Yes, And the issue is that at the point where you start using a concept and record it into an information model, you are providing it the context. Yes, so it's quite difficult to develop context-free units of meaning, and this has been discussed and this discussion started in 2005. Yes, and at that point in time, we call it the naked kernel discussion. Yes, so one of the problems in that naked kernel discussion that was started by Alan Rector, and when we were discussing a different name for the situation hierarchy. Yes, in the early days, that was context-dependent categories. It was a plural concept and introduced the idea of categories and so on. So there were several options, context-dependent concepts, but then we were getting into the discussion about what the concept was and so on. So we did a poll in the community and got feedback, and part of the feedback was, well, the problem is more important, is broader than how we call it. Yes, and part of the problem is that well, the final name for that new hierarchy, the situation hierarchy, was situations with explicit context. It was hard to sell because of the explicit word. Yes, many people said, well, people will be joking about it for years. But you have seen that it has not had that problem. Part of the problem we have, or why we care about this topic, is because we have a hierarchy that is situations with explicit context, and we have a hierarchy in findings, disorders, that are situations with implicit context. Because each concept, you can understand it as the clinical entity it is representing, like edema. Yes, so that's the edema you find in the books. It's kind of an entity, a class, but at the time you record it in an electronic health record, it's an instance of edema. It's an instance of that class. And in SNOMED, there is what is called a soft default. So it is understood that if you don't say otherwise, if you are not overriding some of the context model attributes, then finding has a soft default that says that it is happening now, is happening in the subject of record, and is present. Yes, so actually every concept in the findings hierarchy has two interpretations. There are a lot of discussions points around this. Yes, whether those default contexts only trigger when you add them to the record. Yes, but the issue is that we have in the past, the idea was, okay, if we don't say anything about edema, then the soft default is that edema is present. If we say that edema is not present, it's absent, we put that in the situation hierarchy. Yes, edema absent is not a kind of edema. Yes, it's complicated at the end of the day. Yes, but that was creating, or is creating, many problems in aggregation and in queries. And the inferences are, some of those inferences are not entirely correct. So the start of this thread, as I said before, was 2005. And by that point in time, we were quite candid and said, well, we have to solve this issue before SNOMED gets broadly adopted in 5 years. Yes, that will have been 2010. Yes, so I was talking with Jai earlier today that we have been discussing these topics for many years, and it's something that it's potentially having a significant impact. We hope that this could be resolved with guidance to try to have a homogeneous implementation of this. And eventually, if there is a need to improve the concept model, it will be part of the SNOMED international process, content management process. Yes. What is important is that this should be topic in the agenda. Here, the naked kernel thread is a long thread of discussions between most of the terminologists that were working with SNOMED at that point in time, and the essential positions. I think I selected only two here, Kent and David. Kent thought that the problem of the two meanings was certainly something that needed to be resolved, but perhaps the solution was worse than the problem. And so back in history, the assumption was if we want to create context-free concepts, we have to consider that each finding, instead of having soft defaults, will have explicit context. And if we have explicit context, we can merge findings and disorders, all of them in explicit, and model them using a different hierarchy where we have the clinical entities, and those will be the context-free or naked context concepts. Yes, obviously that has a significant impact, but it's something that potentially could be computable. So if you have part of your information in the information model, part in the terminology model, you can eventually classify and have that traceable. And the first thing I'll criticize at this point of my presentation will be, let's put everything in the information model. Yes, but the problem is that information models are quite different. So interoperability will be an issue. And even if you put it in the information model, you should have a way of normalizing that information model to be able to compare assertions done in different information model decisions. And on the other hand, terminology developers don't have control about how their work is going to be used. Yes, and there are a lot of impoverished information models, yes, code and description, and say, well, I don't support anything else. So I'll shift instead of continuing this thread that we will see during several meetings. Yes, and I hope that we have participation. We hear other proposals and so on. So instead of going in detail into why, we will get into what the problem is in a couple of examples, and then just focus on the inversion of the hierarchies. And one of the points that we got in our research was that when you invert the hierarchies, the inferences are right, and the hierarchies look ugly. Yes, people say it's not intuitive. How can I reason about that? And one of the good ideas this week was, well, let's hide them. Why show them if they are not intuitive? So let's, here we see one of the examples that was brought this week about family history of pulmonary emphysema that is a family history of pulmonary disease when you are asserting it, that is present, yes, non-present. But when you say it's non-absent, that relationship, that inference with the question mark is incorrect. Yes. If you say, well, there is no family history of emphysema, yes, and you infer that there is no family history of pulmonary disorders, then the inference is not right. Yes, you are making a more general assertion. So that is one of the points that we have to correct. Yes. Some people will say, well, Guillermo, for 20 years, we have had this. Yes, and no one has complained. But we see that we are adding more content that have this pattern. Yes, we have more people that are trying to query this and extract data. Yes, so it's more mature. Even if we try to ignore this, ignorance is not the cheapest option. Yes, in the long run. So we need to resolve that. So inconsistent inference on the left, the same we had from the previous slide, and then a consistent inference on the right. Yes, so you see there that there is an inversion of the hierarchy. Yes, the things that were in a negative of this kind, it is being defined by the children, yes, rather than the ancestors. And you see here that the hierarchy is you have a correct inference. So if you say there is no family history of pulmonary disorders, then you know that there is no family history of emphysema, but not otherwise. If there is no family of emphysema, you are not excluding, pulmonary disorders. So this is desirable. Is this intuitive to look at? If you start from the top, it's not intuitive. Yes. So because it's quite difficult. Yes. It's like when you go to a bar and say, I want a coffee, no cream. And they say, oh, we don't have a coffee, no cream. We have a coffee, no sugar. And you say, well, what's that? Is that a negation? Is negating something else? Or no, should I order that? Well, this is a similar problem, yeah? Because they are overlapping things that not necessarily are answering the question. Here we have another example. We are not in the situation hierarchy where we knew that context was explicit. There is context now in the modeling pattern in the findings, and Interpret has interpretation. And again, this is opinionated. It's not in the documentation. But in my view, Interpret has interpretation is a way of synthesizing attributes. Attributes and roles, attributes and role fillers in a way that is dynamic, because you can combine in certain way in a role group the variable and the value. Yes, so you can do a lot of things with this. It's quite flexible, and it is used and abused in many cases, particularly when you have to code things that are impossible to represent, or when you want to code things that are not supported by the MRCM, by the concept model. Yes, because you don't have an attribute that represents that. So you have a workaround with Interpret has interpretation. Here we have concepts in the international release that where there is a negative and says the negative is just handled with the does not operator. I know it's a hack, but it works. Yes, so in certain way it works for at least getting a concept ID for that. Obviously, when you try to aggregate that, you have the same problem. Yes, it's exactly the same as in the situation hierarchy, but now it's happening on findings. Yes, where we were context-free, yes, or not, or we have soft defaults, but now we have a mess, yes, which is a more elevated situation. So this is easy to test at home using Protege and having a mini terminology that does that. So because all of you would like to probably try this, I hope. Here you have an example in Protege that is bare bones concepts, and you see that the inferences are quite different. So here you have a correction of what we will be expecting. Yes, we will be expecting that if you are not able to have verbal communication, that doesn't mean that you are not able to communicate, which will be the incorrect inference. So here you have a correction of the hierarchy, and this is being done by modifying the classification process. I mean, the classification is a standard. It's just, in this case, done twice. This is just one possible algorithm. This is not what we do now, but it's an easy way of explaining it. And there are many variants. There are many ways of making this more efficient. And clearly, there is no need to do classification twice. You can eventually do just an increment, modify through the OWL API some of the axioms, and just do an incremental classification. So that technology is there now. It's just about taking this. However, in our case, we did the example with two classifications because we are trying to use the standard out toolkit from SNOMED International. Yes, trying to keep the standard process. So essentially, you identify all the findings. In this case, we have been looking at situations and findings. When you are on situations, you have to look for the findings, the associated findings that are in the same role group with something that is being negated. And then when you are in findings, you have to look for the observables that are being negated in the has interpretation thing. Yes, so the process is mostly the same. You identify the targets, you put them somewhere, you'll be able to use them, get the transitive closure of those things that are referenced and giving you bad inferences, and create a sub-hierarchy or a resource that is inverted, where the leaves are now the roots and the roots were now the leaves. Yes, so it's an inverted pyramid. Yes, remember that SNOMED is like a tree that is opening. This is a tree that is upside down this way. You understood? Okay, I got my point. Then you do some replacement and so on, put things back on their place and classify again, and voila, you had the hierarchy that you wanted to have. Well, again, these are examples in Protege showing you the way it is and the experimental situation hierarchy. Yes. We will probably exchange in the group or with some other SNOMED addicts some of these examples and try to find this is the easy part, because this is non-absent, or this is does not. Yes, but what happens when you say probably absent? Probably absent is the same as probably present. I mean, it's quite difficult to say how much is this is 0.8 or this is 0.4 because of that. So there are many things that seem to be partial negations that behave like positives. So this is I'll say a parallel discussion about how to do it. Hi. Okay, and I think where this is the example with the able to talk, able to communicate, not able to talk, not able to communicate. So I wanted to give time for questions. I hope that no one is scared. There is someone who is scared. So let's try to survive together for the rest. Questions?
Thank you, Guillermo. And yeah, hopefully no one's running away because we got to the Q&A session for you, Guillermo. But as a reminder, if you've got any questions for Guillermo, please, the microphone is at the back of the room there near the camera. If you would like to come forward and ask Guillermo any questions. We have no questions online at the moment. Young.
Thanks, Guillermo. Very good summary about the challenge and the issues with how to represent the negation, in particular, the reasoning, the upside down of the classification result. My question is, in your slides, you show the definition, the second one is still as fully defined. I'm wondering, how do you tweak the model? Because when we flip that hierarchy, we can program it down basically as we have transitive closure. Then we can just reverse, have the inverse relationship rather than either, and we point in the opposite direction, so that can be flipped without even using the classified reasoning power. But in your approach, do you have any kind of a technical side on change of axiom and use classify?
Yes, during earlier discussions this week. Yes, we are that kind of people. We discuss these things in the breaks. So one of the proposals was, why not put things there that are primitive? So, perhaps we should not define them. But if you don't define them, you lose maintainability in the long run. Yes, so you want to fully define them. In our case, the way we do that is by inverting the hierarchy and having a temporal hierarchy, a derived hierarchy that is there, and we can stop and we can even change the configuration so you see the hierarchy, so you can debug it, and then that hierarchy will have concept IDs with a prefix like a minus if you want. So it is quite easy to go back and forth between the negated and non-negated option. And so it's a straight replacement. So you have the minus concept ID that originally had, but with inverted hierarchy. And then when we go and modify with that inverted hierarchy, we go and modify the original definition and point to the negative version of the concept, and we can keep that fully defined. And then when we classify it, it works. So that's why they are fully defined, because it is using a hierarchy that must not be there, but is there at classification time. Yes, I'm not sure if this address all your questions, but the idea is that this is just one way of doing it, but we thoroughly, when someone said, well, let's keep this primitive so we avoid a lot of problems, you say, well, it has a cost. There is no free lunch here. And there are some, when we say it's negation, well, it's the mini negation, yes, because we are not, when we say no edema, we are talking about coffee, about things, all the things that you see around you that are not edema. Yes, so it's an open world assumption. Here, what we are saying is we want a correct inference when you say you have a concept that says does not talk, and another concept that it already exists that says does not communicate. So it's a very restrictive thing only for querying. It's not for reasoning in the real world.
Thanks, Jim. We've got time for one more question, Jim.
Yep.
The first time I heard this discussion, it made my head hurt, and it still does. And the reason I just wanted to reflect that, we have a lot of discussion about whether observation results should be in observables or whether there should be pre-coordinated findings. And I think that this is, an example of the type of thing I cite that, well, that data clearly should go in observable entities, because you can, in your information model, you can easily serve, the data management requirements and the analytic requirements without having to go through this tap dance. So it's not a question exactly. It was just an observation from a real world data manager.